34 years ago, a young mother and her newborn daughter vanished without a trace after leaving their home in Fort Worth, Texas, leaving behind a car abandoned by the Trinity River with the door open and the diaper bag still intact. The investigation lasted for months, but yielded no body, no clues, and no satisfactory explanation. Authorities suspected the husband was involved, but lacking evidence, the case went cold and was forgotten in the archives. However, after more than 3 decades, a young investigator from the Cold Case Unit discovered a small overlooked detail in the file, one detail enough to change the entire case and shock the entire city of Fort Worth. Before diving into this gripping story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love cold cases solved after decades, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part. On the afternoon of June 12, 1978, Fort Worth was sweltering in the dry, scorching heat of Texas. On the quiet street of Magnolia Drive, the air hung thick and still in the late afternoon sun. It was 5:30 p.m. when Evelyn Barrett, 29, an elementary school teacher at South Hills Elementary, carried her 10-month-old daughter Savannah out of their single-story brick house painted cream. She told her neighbor Nancy Clements, who was watering her garden next door, that she was heading to the Kroger supermarket to pick up a few things before coming home to make dinner. Nancy remembered the scene clearly. The woman with brown hair tied up high, wearing a light blue dress, smiling as she gently patted the back of the baby chattering happily in her mother's arms. Evelyn placed the baby in the back seat, carefully buckling the safety strap, then shut the door with a decisive motion. The beige Ford Fairmont's engine hummed to life, the tires crunching over the dry gravel in the driveway. Nancy looked up, seeing the sunlight flash off the windshield for a second before the car turned onto the main road. That was the last time she saw the Barrett mother and daughter. Nearly 2 hours later, around 7 p.m., Richard Barrett, Evelyn's husband, got off work at the oil pumping station on the south side of the city. The familiar route home felt off for some reason, making him uneasy without knowing why. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw the kitchen lights still on, the front door ajar, and his wife's car gone from the yard. Inside the house, the air was strangely quiet. On the dining table, a note lay next to a set of keys: milk, baby formula, batteries, crackers. Evelyn's familiar slanted handwriting. He opened the fridge. The items on the list were still missing. Up in Savannah's room, he saw the crib empty, the pink blanket neatly folded, the toys still lined up on the shelf. No signs of haste, no message. He called his wife's name, his voice echoing through the empty house, then stepped out onto the porch, scanning the street. The sunset stretched across the rooftops, no sound of cars, no one in sight. He ran over and knocked on Nancy's door, asking urgently, "Did you see Evelyn come back?" Nancy shook her head, saying she'd only seen her leave around 5:30 and thought she'd been home for a while. Richard returned to the house, checking the living room, the garage, then opening the closet. Everything was intact. He glanced at the clock, the second hand ticking slowly, sweat beading on his forehead. A cold feeling began to creep into his mind. Something wasn't right. He tried calling a few friends, but no one knew where Evelyn was. His steps slowed in the brightly lit kitchen, his hand trembling as he picked up the phone receiver. His voice choked and broke when he told the Fort Worth police dispatcher, "My wife and daughter are missing. I don't know where they went." Richard was still standing there, hand on the phone receiver, when the dispatcher's voice came through from the other end. "Secure the scene. We're on our way." Outside, the last of the sunset had faded, leaving only faint streaks of light reflecting off the window panes. He hung up, looking around the quiet house. Everything was just as it had been, except for the absence of the 2 people he loved most. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars turned onto Magnolia, their sirens fading as they pulled up to the yard. Headlights swept over the yellow brick wall and the flower beds out front. Neighbors peeked out, a few gathering at the wooden fence, whispering to each other. Detective Ray Harlan, a middle-aged man with a sun-weathered face, stepped out of the black Plymouth and greeted Richard with a slight nod. He asked a few short questions in a calm voice. "Tell me from the beginning, When was the last time you saw your wife and daughter? Richard recounted, his voice hoarse, every detail of the afternoon. The fact that Evelyn had said she was going to Kroger, how he'd come home to find the light on, and Savannah's crib empty. Harlan listened silently, jotting notes quickly, then instructed an officer to check the rooms in the house, the backyard, and the alley next door. No signs of forced entry, no pried windows, everything in place. Nancy Clements, the neighbor next door, was brought over for a statement. She said she'd seen Evelyn put the baby in the car around 5:30. Both looked perfectly normal. No one following, no sounds of arguing. Someone else at the end of the street vaguely recalled seeing the Ford Fairmont turn toward the road leading to the Trinity River, but wasn't sure. By nearly 8:30, Harlan decided to expand the search. He requested a team to comb the neighborhood within a 5-mile radius, including the area along the Trinity River, where people often fished in the late afternoon. The sky was darkening, wind from the river carrying the scent of damp earth and scorched grass. The search team's flashlights swept over tree trunks, flickering on the dirt path leading down to the riverbank. Richard went with them, each step feeling heavier. He kept glancing back toward his street, where his house light still shone, the house now empty. Around 10 p.m., a young officer shouted, "Sir, there's a car here." Harlan hurried down the sandy slope, where the flashlight beam reflected off something beige. It was Evelyn's Ford Fairmont. The car was parked crookedly at the edge of the trail, less than 10 meters from the water's edge. The driver's side door was slightly open, keys still in the ignition. Inside, the front seat was tidy. On the passenger seat was Savannah's diaper bag, unzipped, with the baby formula and water bottle still inside. Evelyn's purse was on the dashboard, money, cards, and papers all there. The back car seat's safety strap was unbuckled, as if someone had just lifted the baby out. Richard staggered forward, his trembling hand touching the car's hood. "This is her car," he said softly, eyes fixed on the dark by the water's edge. Harlan signaled for him to step back, then shone the light around the vehicle. No blood, no signs of struggle, no clear footprints beyond a few shallow imprints in the sand, possibly Evelyn's or a passerby's. A grocery receipt lay on the floor, time-stamped 6:12 p.m. Everything stopped there, as if Evelyn had just stepped away for a moment and never returned. The night wind picked up, carrying the chirp of insects and cold mist from the Trinity River. A few officers shone lights along the water's edge, the lapping waves mixing with hushed voices. Richard stood a few meters away, hands on his head, eyes glued to the empty spot where the car had stopped. In the flashlight beam, his face was pale, his breathing ragged. Harlan approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find her. You should go home and rest." But Richard shook his head, voice low. "I can't go home without seeing them." Police called in reinforcements. Patrol car headlights illuminated a wide area along the riverbank, revealing every tree trunk and patch of thick grass. Another team swept the road leading to the highway, but found no other signs. Harlan stared pensively at the river, the flashlight reflecting in his eyes. In over 10 years on the force, he'd seen many missing persons cases, but none left this elusive feeling. A young woman, an intact car, everything pointing to her leaving quietly, and then, gone. Near midnight, as the river wind began to blow harder, Harlan signaled everyone to halt the search and secure the area to resume in the morning. He turned back for one last look at the car, the light reflecting off the silver hood. A nameless feeling stirred in him, not suspicion, but a hunch that this story wasn't just a simple disappearance. In the distance, the Barrett house light still flickered faintly through the trees, where a man waited for the phone to ring, waiting for something that might explain the endless silence of that Texas summer night in 1978. Early the next morning, the first sunlight glinted silver off the Trinity River's surface, where Evelyn Barrett's beige Ford Fairmont still sat silently under a thin layer of fog. Detective Ray Harlan returned to the scene at 7 a.m., cold coffee in hand. He examined the car once more, noting details the night lights might have missed. No skid marks, no disturbed items, just silence. Harlan muttered. A mother doesn't leave without her diaper bag and purse. At 8 a.m., at Fort Worth Police Headquarters, Richard Barrett was called in for a detailed statement. He looked exhausted, still in the same shirt from the night before. When Harlan asked about their marriage, Richard hesitated, saying things had been a bit tense lately. He said, Evelyn seemed anxious, often avoiding conversation and sleeping in the daughter's room. When asked when he'd last seen his wife, Richard replied, yesterday morning before I went to work. Harlan noticed he paused several times mid-sentence, as if choosing words carefully. By noon, the forensics team returned to the Barrett home. In Evelyn's desk drawer, they found an unstamped envelope. Inside was a handwritten unsent divorce petition, dated June 2, 1978. The content was brief. I can't keep living in fear. I need freedom. And our daughter needs her mother. The handwriting matched Evelyn's. When Harlan showed the letter to Richard, he glanced at it briefly, was silent for a long time, then said, I didn't know she wrote it. The investigative team began collecting statements from Evelyn's neighbors and friends. Nancy Clements said Evelyn often mentioned fearing she'd lose custody if they divorced. A colleague at school recalled her crying in the teacher's lounge, saying Richard controlled everything, and once angrily smashed a glass when she mentioned moving back with her mother. All accounts painted Evelyn as stressed and exhausted, but no one thought she intended to leave without warning. The crime scene technicians finished processing the house. No signs of intrusion, no broken doors, no shattered glass. Everything was neat, including the bedding in Savannah's room. Evelyn's dresses still hung fully in the closet. No blood or suspicious evidence. Harlan stood in the living room, looking around, feeling everything was too perfect, as if someone had staged it to leave nothing for the police to grasp. That afternoon, Harlan assembled the full team to review Richard's timeline. Records showed he left the oil facility at 6:30 p.m., corroborated by 2 co-workers. The gate camera captured his car at 6:31 p.m., and he arrived home around 7 p.m., as stated. The alibi checked out, at least for the time of Evelyn's disappearance. However, one detail nagged at Harlan. Richard had no proof for the time from 7 p.m. to 7:40 p.m. before calling police. When asked, he just said, I looked around the house, thought she might be walking somewhere. As word of the disappearance spread, local media jumped in. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram ran a story headlined, Mysterious Disappearance of Mother and Baby, Husband Denies Involvement. Articles highlighted the car, left by the Trinity River, purse and diaper bag intact, fueling public suspicion toward Richard. Harlan felt the pressure mounting, but he wouldn't let it sway the investigation. That evening, he invited Richard back for a second interview. No accusations, just clarifying a few points. In the small room, yellow light fell on his weary face. Harlan asked, Do you think your wife left on her own? Richard was silent, then said, That's not who she is. Harlan pressed, Was she afraid of you? This time, Richard looked him in the eye. I've never done anything to make her afraid. The answer was calm, but something heavy in his tone made Harlan note mentally. Suppressed emotion, holding back. After the interview, Harlan returned to his office, gazing out the window where city lights reflected off the Texas night sky. On his desk, he spread out the file, the car, the diaper bag, the grocery receipt, the unsent divorce petition, friend statements. Everything made sense, but nothing explained why a mother would vanish without taking her child, or any essentials. He knew cases like this often started as missing persons and ended in tragedy. But there was no evidence yet that it had. On the third day after Evelyn's disappearance, the Fort Worth police chief signed an order officially transferring the file to the Special Missing Persons Unit. Case number FW 23178. Detective Ray Harlan was assigned to continue leading. In the first summary report, he wrote concisely, Victim, female, 29, daughter, 10 months. No signs of violence, marital and family psychological factors present. Low likelihood of voluntary departure. Harlan closed the file, turned off the light, and left the office as the clock neared midnight. Outside, wind from the Trinity River direction still blew in, carrying the scent of earth and water. In that moment, he had a strange feeling that he wasn't just searching for a missing person, but tracing the trail of something buried very deep, right in the heart of this city. On the fourth morning, after Evelyn and Savannah Barrett vanished, a thin fog blanketed the Fort Worth sky, while the Trinity River's surface reflected the dull gray of the clouds. The entire riverbank area was cordoned off, dozens of police officers, rescuers, and forensics teams working in silence. The only sounds the hum of generators and the gentle waves lapping at the sandy shore. Detective Ray Harlan stood close to the water's edge, eyes tense as he watched the dive team prepare their gear. 3 days had passed, and every hypothesis led back to one place. This was the last spot where traces of Evelyn Barrett appeared. The divers entered the water at 8 a.m. The Trinity River's surface looked calm, but beneath the murky brown water lurked dangerous undertows. The current was slow but deep and steep, making the search difficult. Each time they surfaced, water dripped from masks and oxygen tanks onto the sand, bringing nothing but a few stray weeds. By mid-morning, one called out, "Something floating near buoy number 3. Harlan rushed over immediately, kneeling to observe. A small pale pink item was caught in roots along the bank. It was a baby's shoe, soft fabric with a rabbit design, soaked in mud and slightly torn at the toe. Richard Barrett confirmed, voice raspy, that it was the pair Savannah wore when she left home. In that moment, no one said anything more, only the river's flow and Harlan's gaze lingered on the heavy water. That afternoon, the forensics team took the shoe to the lab. No blood traces, but the sole clung with a distinctive red soil, fine, slightly dark, unlike the Trinity Riverbank soil. A technician in the forensics department recognized the color as similar to samples from the Amarillo area, North Texas, over 300 miles from Fort Worth. Harlan heard the report and stood silent for a long time. Amarillo? No way, he muttered. But if true, it meant Evelyn's car had traveled farther than Fort Worth, then returned here. Why? Where had she gone in those few hours before vanishing? The next day, rescue teams continued diving along a nearly 2-mile stretch of river. They divided into 3 groups, sweeping with cables and underwater metal detectors. Harlan watched patiently, eyes never leaving the river's surface. Each time a diver's silhouette appeared then vanished in the murky water, he hoped for something, a piece of evidence, or at least an answer. But by the end of the second day, there was nothing but a few rotted fabric scraps and rusted cans. By the third day, under the harsh Texas sun, the search effort seemed to hit a dead end. The river remained as still as if it held no secrets. "If they're here, we'd have found them by now," the rescue team leader whispered to Harlan as he removed his dive mask. Harlan just nodded, but inside, he wasn't ready to give up. He requested the soil sample from the Ford Fairmont's tires be sent to the Dallas Regional Lab for in-depth analysis. He wanted certainty where that red soil really came from. 2 days later, a report from FBI Dallas arrived. Microscopic optical analysis confirmed the soil contained iron oxide characteristic of the High Plains, Amarillo Basin. No mistaking it, this soil wasn't found in Fort Worth. The FBI also assisted in modeling possible vehicle routes based on fuel levels and the Kroger purchase time. According to it, if Evelyn left the supermarket at 6:12 p.m. and drove straight north for about 4 hours, she could reach the Amarillo area by midnight, then return to Fort Worth early the next morning, aligning with when the car was discovered on the evening of June 12th. But what would make her take that trip alone, with a baby in tow, only to return and vanish right where she lived? As the FBI and Fort Worth police pieced together data fragments, the media swarmed the Trinity River area. KXAS-TV Dallas-Fort Worth set up a broadcast truck right on the sandy bank, while the Fort Worth Star-Telegram ran a front-page story. "Mysterious mother and child vanish by Trinity River, car abandoned, no signs of violence." The story spread quickly across Texas. Everyone had their theories. Some said Evelyn was abducted. Others believed she left due to marital pressure. Some even rumored she jumped in the river with her daughter, though no evidence supported it. Richard Barrett became the media's focus. Cameras and reporters crowded his doorstep every morning. Harlan had to station an officer to hold back the throng. Under public pressure, the police department held a press conference. Harlan, in a white shirt, stood before dozens of microphones, voice hoarse. "We can't conclude anything yet. There's no evidence of violence or crime. The search continues." But as he stepped off the podium, he glanced back at the map spread on the table, where red-marked lines stretched from Fort Worth to Amarillo, and knew this case was slipping beyond a routine disappearance. That evening, he returned to the riverbank alone. The water was flat as a mirror, reflecting faint moonlight. Savannah's small shoe had been collected, but its image lingered in his mind. The only remnant of 2 lives, so light it could be swept away by a single gust. He bent down, tossed his cigarette butt into the river, letting the current carry it off. In the darkness, a westerly wind whispered, and Harlan knew he hadn't touched the truth yet. But he also sensed very clearly that the truth still lay somewhere beneath that murky water, waiting to be pulled into the light. 3 days after the rescue team pulled out of the Trinity River, Detective Ray Harlan returned to the small house on Magnolia Drive, where the disappearance began. June sunlight filtered through the birch trees, casting a soft glow on the roof tiles. But inside that house, the air still hung thick with anxiety and the scent of old paper. Since the car was found, Richard Barrett had temporarily moved in with relatives. The house now felt empty, so quiet you could hear only the slow whir of the ceiling fan. Harlan, along with 2 forensics officers, began a second search. This time focusing on Evelyn's personal items, things that might reveal what neither the scene nor the silent river could. In the bedroom closet, amid neatly folded sweaters, an officer discovered a small wooden box tucked deep inside, lightly dusted. Harlan opened the lid to find 3 pale yellow envelopes, sealed with tape but unstamped, along with a note reading, "Dear Savannah, private." He carefully opened the first envelope. The handwriting was soft, slightly slanted, the light blue ink faintly smudged at the edges. Evelyn wrote, "Dear Savannah, if one day you read these lines, perhaps Mom had to go far away. Mom isn't leaving you out of fear, but because I can't stand life here anymore. Fort Worth is suffocating me. I'm afraid of losing you, afraid they'll take you from my arms." Harlan read slowly, each word growing heavier. He moved to the second envelope. The letter was longer, mentioning how Evelyn no longer believed justice would protect a mother, and that she had to find somewhere else to start over. In it, she referred to an old friend up north, and a dry land red as dust, a detail that made Harlan pause. Red soil, exactly like the sample found on the tires, characteristic of the Amarillo region. The final letter was the shortest, written hastily, as if scrawled in a moment of panic. "If anyone reads this, please tell Savannah that Mom loves her. Everything I do is to keep her safe. Don't let them say otherwise." The 3 letters, no addressee, no stamps, no signs of being sent. All written before Evelyn vanished, at least a week prior, based on the ink type and the date on the half-torn calendar page hanging in the kitchen. Harlan sat silently in the living room, holding the thin letters, gazing out the window at the cracked dry garden. In that moment, he clearly felt what his investigative instincts didn't want to admit. Evelyn Barrett may have deliberately left Fort Worth. Based on the handwriting, the expert confirmed it was Evelyn's, matching the notes found in the car and on the kitchen table. However, none of the letters were addressed to Richard. Not a single line mentioned him. All the emotion, fear, and regret were directed towards Savannah, the child, not yet 1 year old. Harlan saw in it a clear inner conflict between love and despair, between the desire to escape and the sense of guilt. That afternoon, he sat alone in the meeting room, spreading the letters out on the table. Behind him on the map were the marked lines from Fort Worth to Amarillo, then stopping with a red dot by the Trinity River. He slowly said to Parker, "She may have planned it, No signs of violence, no struggle marks, no bodies. Everything is too quiet. This could be an intentional disappearance. Parker looked at him, hesitating. You think she's still alive? Harlan didn't answer right away. He just folded the letters back up, put them in a sealed bag, and said softly, if she's alive, she's hiding, for her daughter. That night, the case file FW 23178 was updated. Under the status notes section, a new line was added in black ink. Possible voluntary disappearance. But as Harlan left the office, the Dear Savannah letters still haunted him. A woman could be brave enough to leave behind her purse, her car, her real name, just to protect her child. He knew the case wasn't over, but in the pale yellow night lights of Fort Worth, Detective Harlan also understood that the search for Evelyn Barrett had now shifted direction from a criminal investigation to the pursuit of a mother fleeing her own life. The Dear Savannah letters completely changed the direction of the case, but they also opened a new void in Detective Ray Harlan's mind. If Evelyn Barrett had truly left on her own, then why were there no traces of transactions, movements, or documents? She couldn't vanish from Fort Worth without leaving any financial trail, unless no one had ever checked them from the start. That thought nearly made Harlan angry as he reviewed the investigation file in the following week. Reports on assets, bank accounts, and Evelyn's DMV records had never been requested. No account statements, no credit card traces, no records of the Ford Fairmont being re-registered or reported stolen. In 1978, the Fort Worth Police Department still operated entirely manually, with most information stored on paper and microfilm. Federal queries had to be sent by mail or fax, taking 2 to 3 weeks for a response. A missing persons case, unless there was evidence of violence, was rarely prioritized. Harlan recalled that in the first week, he had suggested checking the Barrett's bank transactions, but his superiors at the time deemed this case lacks criminal elements. Everything was handled as a voluntary disappearance. When he submitted a request for a statewide DMV query to see if Evelyn had applied for a new driver's license, the administrative department replied, "Cannot proceed due to lack of criminal basis." Within the department, other serious cases, murders, armed robberies, took up all the manpower, and the Evelyn Barrett case gradually got sidelined. In August 1978, the media began to turn away. After nearly 2 months with no progress, newspapers that had once run big headlines like "Mysterious Mother and Child Vanish" by Trinity River now only printed a few small lines on page 3, "No signs of crime. Police continue search," but they weren't really continuing. The search team was pulled back, forensic staff moved to other cases. Harlan, the only one still pursuing it, spent his weekends driving along the Trinity River, hoping to find something overlooked. He found nothing but a few rusted beer cans and shards of glass, possibly from an old accident. That fall, Harlan submitted his final proposal: expand the investigation to neighboring states, especially New Mexico and Oklahoma, since many who left Texas chose the I-40 route through Amarillo and across state lines. He suggested coordinating with FBI Dallas to trace the Ford Fairmont's VIN, but the proposal was rejected. "No crime, no federal case," his superior said curtly. Harlan slammed his hand on the desk, voice strained. "A mother and child can't just evaporate because we don't have computers," but it only met with silence. In the final months of 1978, the Barrett case was officially classified as an inactive case. No one said it outright, but everyone understood that was how an unsolved case was closed. Harlan was transferred to another criminal unit, specializing in property theft, a clear step down from his previous position. In the final meeting, he packed the Evelyn Barrett file into a brown box, labeled on the outside "Pending, no update." Before closing the lid, he paused to look at the 3 Dear Savannah letters one more time, then sighed. He knew he hadn't finished, but he also understood that at that time, no one wanted to hear more about this case. Early in 1979, after more than 6 months with no leads, the Barrett file was transferred to temporary storage. A brief summary was sent to the police chief's office. No traces of violence found, no witnesses, No unusual financial transactions. Vehicle and personal items seized. Possible voluntary departure with daughter. When the last newspaper mentioned the case in February, the headline was just a short sentence: Evelyn Barrett case. May have left state. Then everything went silent. In the years that followed, Harlan occasionally drove by Magnolia Drive, looking at the Barrett family's old house, now sold to new owners. The wooden fence repainted, different curtains in the windows, but in his eyes, the image of the evening of June 12th remained the same. The yellow light, the empty crib, and the young man standing in the middle of the room, unaware that his life had just changed forever. He was no longer allowed access to the Barrett file, but he still kept a copy of the Polaroid photo of Evelyn and Savannah in his leather wallet. Each time he looked at it, he wondered if there had been a few more tools. If there had been a federal database system like the FBI was testing, would she still be considered someone who vanished on her own? In 1979, when Fort Worth cleared out old files, the box labeled FW 23178 was moved to the department's basement storage, covered in a thick layer of dust. No one knew that inside, the Dear Savannah letters still lay there, and that it would take more than 30 years for them to be opened again. 4 years passed since the name Evelyn Barrett disappeared from Texas newspapers. The city of Fort Worth had forgotten, but Detective Ray Harlan had not. Even after being transferred to another unit, he quietly followed every missing persons report with similar characteristics. On his old desk at police headquarters, the Polaroid photo of Evelyn and baby Savannah remained clipped to the file cover, a reminder that the case had never truly ended. Early summer 1982, on a sweltering morning, Harlan received a call from the Santa Fe, New Mexico Police Department. A female officer named Martha Ruiz said they had just received a report from a local resident claiming to have seen a woman very much like Evelyn Barrett at a small market in the town of Clovis near the Texas border. The woman was with a girl, about 4 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, calling her mom. The tipster, a truck driver, said he recognized the face from an old news bulletin he'd seen during a trip through Texas a few years earlier. Harlan listened, heart racing, the old intuition surging back. Though no longer in missing persons, he still requested permission to follow up with Santa Fe for verification. 3 days later, the report came back to Fort Worth. Clovis police checked the market, questioned vendors, but no one clearly remembered a woman matching the photo Harlan sent. No address, no license plate, just a vague description of a woman with a southern accent, buying bread and milk, then leaving in an old silver car. No evidence, no trace. When Harlan suggested reopening the file, his superior just said coolly, 4 years, Ray, nothing solid. Could just be a look-alike. The call from New Mexico ended there, but in Harlan's heart the old flame that had just flared was half extinguished. A month later, while sorting unsolved case files, a young file clerk found an odd record, a birth certificate filed in Amarillo on July 3, 1978, just 3 weeks after Evelyn and Savannah vanished. The baby on the certificate was named Clara Cantor, born August 12, 1977. Matching exactly with Savannah Barrett's actual birth date, Harlan could hardly believe his eyes. He immediately called the Amarillo Administrative Office, requesting verification of the parents' identities listed, Alexandra Maria Cantor and John Cantor. But the response left him stunned: no ID information, no address, no driver's license, no social security number for either name. The birth certificate was valid, signed by a local pediatrician, but when investigated, the doctor said he just signed as procedure based on the registrant's statement. No hospital records noted the birth of a baby named Clara Cantor during that time. Harlan immediately sent a federal query to FBI Dallas, citing potential identity fraud and forged birth records. 2 weeks later, the response came back. Brief and disappointing: Clara Cantor file, valid on form, no basis for fraud verification. No fingerprint or identification matches found. No reason for federal investigation. Harlan read that paper over and over, feeling like a door had opened, then slammed shut right in front of him. He knew if Evelyn truly wanted to leave everything behind, creating a new identity was something she could absolutely do. And the name Cantor sounded too neat, too safe, like a prepared cover. But he also understood that in the overlapping and sluggish system of 1982, no one would allow reopening a possible voluntary departure case. When Harlan presented the report to his superior, the familiar answer rang out: insufficient basis for reinvestigation. Add note, file away. He returned to his desk, jotting the final lines in his notebook. If Clara Cantor is Savannah Barrett, then the mother planned it from the start. But why return to Amarillo, the red soil land she once mentioned? That evening, as he left the department, Harlan passed the storage room, where the old Barrett file box still sat quietly in the corner. He opened the cabinet, pulled out the thin file, inserting the New Mexico report and a copy of the Amarillo birth certificate. On the last page, he wrote in heavy strokes, "Potential false identity link, unverified." Then he closed the box lid, pushed it back to its spot, where dust had accumulated through 4 Texas seasons. In the darkness, Harlan stood still for a long time. The flickering neon light, reflecting off the file cover, numbered FW 23178. He knew that would be the last time this case was mentioned for nearly 3 decades. But in his heart, he still believed, even if the system forgot, Evelyn Barrett was still out there somewhere, carrying a child with a different name, and a past that even she couldn't erase. 11 years passed after the final report from New Mexico, and the Evelyn Barrett case gradually sank into oblivion, existing only in the dusty files of the Fort Worth Police Department. Everyone from the old unit had transferred or retired. In April 1993, when the city established the Cold Case Unit, specializing in backlog cases, a long list of hundreds of unsolved missing persons and murders was reviewed for archiving. In that list, file number FW 23178 appeared with the cold note, "Mother and child, last seen June 12, 1978. Detective Ray Harlan was then over 60, hair mostly gray, face etched with more wrinkles. He had left the main investigations unit, working temporarily as an advisor for digitizing old files. When he saw the familiar number again, he stood still for a very long time. All the old memories flooded back: the evening by the Trinity River, yellow lights reflecting on the water, the child's shoe caught in tree roots. He requested permission to pack the Barrett file himself for handover to the Cold Case Unit. The old storage room was in the headquarters basement, smelling of damp paper and metallic dust. Harlan opened the worn brown cardboard box. Inside, everything was just as he'd left it more than 10 years ago. The 3 Dear Savannah letters, the copy of Clara Cantor's birth certificate, a few crime scene photos, and in a small sealed bag, the silver bracelet engraved with SB, the item found in Savannah's diaper bag when the car was discovered. He picked it up, fluorescent light reflecting off the worn metal surface. Everything was intact, only time had changed. When sealing the file, Harlan couldn't bear to hand everything over. He quietly kept a copy of the Polaroid photo of Evelyn holding her daughter, the one he'd carried for years, along with a photo of the bracelet. To him, they weren't evidence, but an unfulfilled promise. "One day, she'll be found," he whispered, then folded the file shut, labeling it FW 23178, Barrett, Evelyn, and Savannah. The newly formed Cold Case Unit had only 4 people then. Computers sparse, all data entered manually from paper files. They prioritized cases, those with bodies, suspects, or DNA evidence first. No body cases were ranked last. Thus, the Barrett file fell into the least likely to be solved group. By the end of 1994, all inactive materials were moved to private storage at Trinity Storage, in the city's East Industrial area. Thousands of paper boxes were placed on iron shelves, labeled by number and year. When the Cold Case staff affixed the final label to the Barrett box, the last note was added in black ink: unresolved, no body, no crime. From then on, the file lay dormant in Trinity Storage, through countless Texas seasons of sun and wind. No one opened it again, no one mentioned it. Those who once knew the case left one by one, and to the city of Fort Worth, Evelyn Barrett was just a faded name on an endless list of missing persons. In 1998, Harlan officially retired. At his farewell, he arrived earlier than everyone, sitting in the empty office, gazing out the window, where late afternoon sun gilded the city center's rooftops. He pulled from his wallet the faded Polaroid photo, next to a scrap of paper with the short line, "If she's alive, she's still a mother." He placed the photo in an envelope, stowed it in his home desk drawer, like a memento for the part of the case that never closed in his heart. 2 decades later, when his name had vanished from the department roster, when younger people cycled through the cold case unit with more modern technology, the Barrett file still lay in its old spot. Dust thickened on the box lid, sealing tape yellowed, Harlan's handwritten note still clear. Inside, the letters, photos, and silver bracelet waited for someone patient enough to reopen them, someone who wouldn't just read the file, but listen to what time hadn't yet fully told. In March 2012, Fort Worth was enveloped in dry heat winds earlier than usual, and in the old basement storage of Trinity Storage, dusty file shelves were opened after nearly 2 decades. The city police were launching a large-scale project digitizing all missing persons files from the 1970s, 1990s. The task seemed simple: scan documents, enter data, assign IDs. But sometimes, those old worn files hid things that could change the investigative history of the entire city. Detective Laura McKinney, 35, was one of the young investigators in the cold case unit assigned to the no-body, unresolved file group. She had graduated from the Dallas Police Academy, known for her meticulousness and ability to read old files as if reliving others' memories. One early April morning, flipping through the list of undigitized cases, her eyes stopped at FW 230-178, Barrett, Evelyn, and Savannah. The only note beside it was the faded line, "Unresolved. No body, no crime." One early April morning, McKinney opened the brown cardboard box sealed with old tape. Inside were yellowed reports, a few black and white photos of the Ford Fairmont by the Trinity River, and a small sealed bag containing the silver bracelet engraved with SB. She paused at the administrative file section, where a copy of Evelyn Barrett's 1977 driver's license was clipped, with faint fingerprints printed in the bottom corner. A seemingly trivial detail, but McKinney knew technology had changed. The FBI's automated fingerprint identification system, AAFIS, could now read prints that 40 years ago couldn't be. She carefully detached the paper, placed it under the specialized scanner, then entered the file number, FW 230-178. The scanning process took less than 10 seconds, but to McKinney, it felt like minutes. The screen showed a progress bar, then lit up with green text, "Match found, 98.7%. Alexandra Maria Cantor, Salem, Oregon." She frowned. The name felt familiar. In the notes section, the system displayed, "Female, born 1949, Texas native, occupation, elementary school teacher. File first updated in 1996. McKinney expanded the data, viewing the original ID photo, a middle-aged woman, light brown hair, gentle smile, bright eyes, the eyes very similar to those in the old Polaroid of Evelyn Barrett she'd just seen in the file box. McKinney leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. She immediately called the FBI Dallas identification specialist, reporting the match results. On the other end, the technician confirmed the Cantor file fingerprints were taken during a 1996 Oregon driver's license issuance, near perfect match to the 1977 Fort Worth sample. Error probability under 2 in 1,000. McKinney fell silent, staring at the glaring screen. After 34 years, a name thought buried in the past had just stepped out of the shadows. That afternoon, she went to the cold case chief's office, bringing the printed match results. The old police veteran sat quietly for a moment, looking at the paper, then said, "I remember this one. Harlan mentioned it. He said she'd be found." His voice lowered. Maybe he was right. McKinney began verifying Alexandra Maria Cantor's identity. Oregon citizen records showed her born in 1949, hometown Fort Worth, Texas. She had been an elementary school teacher in Salem since 1998, with 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl, and no criminal record. Driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, all matched legally. But in the place of birth field of the original file, it read Amarillo, Texas, the area Evelyn Barrett had been linked to. The more McKinney read, the clearer the thin but evident thread connecting the 2 names, Evelyn Barrett and Alexandra Cantor. She pulled archived photos from the Oregon education system, compared them using facial recognition software. The results showed a 91% match. When zooming in on the eyes and jawline, the features perfectly aligned with the woman in the 1978 Polaroid. A chill ran through McKinney. She knew she was standing before a major discovery, not just a decoded missing persons case, but the missing piece of a story spanning 3 decades. She spent the entire evening in the office, poring over Detective Harlan's old reports. The last line in the 1982 report made her pause for a very long time. Potential false identity link, unverified. No one had reopened this file since then. McKinney imagined the image of the old man from years ago, retired for nearly 20 years, carefully folding the Dear Savannah letters and placing them in the box, believing that one day someone would find the truth. And now, that person was her. As the clock neared midnight, McKinney printed the entire preliminary report, marking the file cover in red. Reopen. ID match pending. She gently closed the box, looking at the line, FW 23178, Barrett, Evelyn and Savannah on the lid. Over the past 34 years, time had dusted everything, but fingerprints don't lie. The next morning, she sent the official report to FBI Dallas, requesting assistance in investigating the identity of Alexandra Cantor. In the summary section, McKinney wrote just one short line: after 34 years, case #231 shows signs of life again. And in the bottom corner, she signed her name, carefully forming each letter as if closing a circle that Harlan had opened from the summer of 1978. Detective Laura McKinney, Fort Worth Police Department, Cold Case Unit. 2 weeks after discovering the fingerprint match, Detective Laura McKinney began the most difficult phase, verifying the true identity of Alexandra Maria Cantor, the woman living an ordinary life in Salem, Oregon, but who might be Evelyn Barrett, the mother who vanished from Fort Worth in 1978. From years of investigative experience, McKinney knew that turning a hypothesis into fact required something irrefutable, technical evidence, and legal data, not just coincidence. She started by requesting all of Oregon's DMV records, including Alexandra Cantor's driver's license applications from 1990 to 1995. After 3 days, a thick envelope arrived at the cold case office. McKinney opened each document, placing them next to the scanned copy of Evelyn Barrett's 1977 driver's license from the Trinity storage box. On the left, the faded Polaroid photo of Evelyn in a floral dress, holding her daughter Savannah. On the right, Alexandra Cantor's 1994 driver's license photo, dark brown hair, slightly gaunt face, reserved smile. McKinney fed these photos into the FBI's next-gen facial analysis software, a system that compares minute ratios, distance between eyes, cheekbone curvature, philtrum length. When the results appeared, the screen displayed a 90.3% match rate. That number was nearly certain, as the probability of 2 unrelated people having faces matching to that degree was less than 1 in 10,000. She stared silently at the eyes in the 2 photos. The same calm gaze mixed with sorrow, something time couldn't erase. But McKinney still needed more concrete proof. She requested the Fort Worth Forensics Department to search for any remaining DNA or blood samples from the 1978 file. Fortunately, in the sealed bag containing the Dear Savannah letters, there was an envelope that Evelyn had licked to seal, and the saliva mark might still hold DNA. The sample was rushed to the federal lab. While awaiting results, McKinney continued reviewing documents related to Alexandra Cantor. In the original Oregon file, the birth certificate for Cantor's daughter, Clara, was issued in Amarillo, Texas, on July 3, 1978. Perfectly matching the data Harlan had discovered 30 years earlier. McKinney nearly held her breath as she zoomed in on the seal on the birth certificate copy. The red stamp from the Amarillo Vital Records office looked legitimate at first glance, but the signature below seemed off. The D in the signer's last name was elongated more than usual, the pen stroke thinner than standard 1970s administrative script. She sent the copy to the FBI Dallas document forgery expert, and less than a day later they responded, "The seal on the Clara Cantor birth certificate is a recut from a genuine stamp, using industrial ink that appeared in the early 1980s. It could not exist in 1978. McKinney carefully clipped this document with the facial recognition images, beginning to see the entire story framework emerge. Evelyn Barrett had used a set of forged documents created after her disappearance, possibly through a forgery ring in Los Angeles or Amarillo, matching the rumor Harlan had mentioned in an old report about a neighborhood selling fake birth certificates. 3 days later, the DNA test results arrived. In the lab, the forensics technician presented it neatly. The DNA sample extracted from the 1978 envelope was compared to a hair sample from Alexandra Cantor's medical records in Oregon via temporary federal subpoena. The results matched at 99.6%, irrefutable. The two were one and the same. McKinney stood frozen as she read the conclusion. Every scattered piece from the past 34 years finally fit perfectly: fingerprints, face, blood type, DNA, forged birth certificate, even the Amarillo origins, the red soil land Evelyn had written about in her letters. She leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. Evelyn Barrett lived, she whispered. And all this time, she lived under a different name. The next task was verifying legal identity. McKinney contacted the Oregon Department of Education, where Alexandra Cantor was employed. Records showed Cantor began teaching at Salem Elementary in 1998. With 2 children and no prior investigations or legal entanglements, she was described as dedicated, reserved, and rarely speaking of her past. No one at the school knew she'd ever lived in Texas. This further reinforced the hypothesis that she'd deliberately severed all old ties. At this point, McKinney drafted a report to FBI Dallas, attaching all verification documents, matching images, facial analysis, DNA results, and the document forgery expert's conclusion. In the preliminary summary section, she wrote, "Subject, Alexandra Maria Cantor exhibits biological, biometric, and document evidence matching missing person Evelyn Barrett, Fort Worth case hash, FW 23178. Child's Clara Cantor birth certificate, confirmed counterfeit. Evidence suggests possible reconstruction of original identities post 1978 disappearance." Right below the conclusion, McKinney added a handwritten note, "Possible identity reconstruction case." That evening, after everyone had left, she sat alone in the cold case office. The computer screen still displayed the 2 faces, one of the young mother in 1978, one of the middle-aged woman in 1994, with the exact same eyes. McKinney thought of Ray Harlan, who had kept this photo for the rest of his life. She wished he were still alive to see this moment, to know his intuition hadn't been wrong. She closed the file, feeling both relieved and heavy. After 34 years, Evelyn Barrett's disappearance had been revived, not in the Trinity River's waters, but in the cold data streams of numbers, where the truth had finally spoken up. On the first morning of July 2012, Texas sun slanted across the car windows as Detective Laura McKinney drove toward Denton. The hometown of Margaret Hill, Evelyn Barrett's only old friend, still mentioned in the file. After confirming Alexandra Cantor's true identity, McKinney believed one final piece was missing: what happened in the days after Evelyn vanished. And Hill, if she still held anything from her friend, might be the only one who knew the answer. Margaret's small house sat at the end of a tree-lined street, painted pale yellow with an old wooden porch. When McKinney introduced herself and mentioned Evelyn Barrett, the silver-haired woman before her fell silent for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly, then she said, voice hoarse. She said one day Fort Worth police would come. I've waited 30 years. Margaret stepped inside, opened a wooden cabinet in the living room, and brought out a silver tin box, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Evelyn asked me to keep it. She said if anything happened, give it to whoever came looking for her. When McKinney opened the box, the scent of old paper and dried ink wafted out. Inside were faded Polaroid photos of Evelyn, with Savannah in the garden, a small bracelet engraved SB, a few old train tickets, and a dark brown leather-bound notebook. On the first page, the familiar slanted handwriting appeared. Dear Savannah, for when you are old enough to understand. McKinney said nothing, just stared at the faded blue ink lines, feeling as if she were facing the voice of the mother who vanished in 1978, directly. Evelyn wrote, in light blue Parker ink, slanted and light, like a confession. We left Fort Worth before dawn. Mom cut her hair short and changed her name. You slept soundly, clutching your stuffed bunny tight. At the gas station outside town, Mom looked in the mirror and saw a stranger looking back. McKinney turned to the next page. Amarillo is dry and red as dust. They didn't ask much, just needed cash. A man on Polk Street helped Mom fill out a new birth certificate for you, he said. This name will protect you both. From today, you're Clara Cantor. The next page was written in a different pen, handwriting slightly shaky. We left Amarillo at night. You coughed. Mom was afraid of being stopped, so she turned off the lights and drove all the way to New Mexico. Desert wind whistled through the door. You slept on Mom's lap. Mom promised you, wherever we go, they won't separate us. Each line soaked in anxiety, but interspersed was a mother's love and survival instinct in flight. When McKinney reached the end of the notebook, the room's air grew heavy with silence. Evelyn wrote, Salem, Oregon. Rain falls all day. Mom says we're from Kansas, applies to teach at a small school near the church. Every night, Mom writes you a few lines, just to remind herself the past hasn't vanished. Between 2 pages, a Polaroid photo was clipped, Evelyn in a brown coat, standing by a wooden window with the blonde-haired baby babbling in her arms, clearly Savannah. But below the photo, she'd written the new name, Clara, 11 months old. The box also held 3 unsent letters, paper yellowed, edges frayed from folding. One addressed to an old friend from school, the first line reading, I'm still alive, but I can't come back. Another to Evelyn's mother, if you read this, forgive me. I couldn't let them take the baby. Here, we're safe. The final letter just one short sentence, like a last testament. Savannah, Mom loves you. If anyone finds this, tell her Mom did her best. McKinney gently closed the papers, a lump rising in her throat. She needed no more technical evidence. This diary said it all. Evelyn Barrett hadn't died. She'd left Fort Worth in a desperate but deliberate plan, and she'd left traces of that journey in every stroke of her pen. To confirm the dating, McKinney took the notebook to the unit's old evidence analysis department. Results verified, the paper and ink types were produced between 1978 and 1983, perfectly matching the period Evelyn was believed to have lived in hiding. The ink differences in the beginning and end lines prove the notebook was written gradually over years, not a later fabrication. When returning the box to Margaret's house, McKinney asked why she'd never handed it over to police before. Margaret sat still, eyes on the garden. Because Evelyn asked me not to. She said if anyone asked, let time speak for her. I trusted that. Now you've come. I think time's had long enough. She pulled a final photo from her pocket, handing it to McKinney. In it, Evelyn sat on a wooden chair on the porch, holding the now larger child, smiling peacefully. Behind, a small sign scrawled in white chalk, Welcome home. On the drive back to Fort Worth, McKinney didn't turn on the radio, just listened to the wind whistling through the windows. In her mind, Evelyn's route unfolded, Fort Worth, Amarillo, then to Oregon, each stop an effort to keep her daughter by her side. The diary wasn't just evidence, it was a mother's final account of unyielding resolve. Back at the office, she spread all the photos, letters, and notebook across the table. Every piece now fit: Amarillo red soil, forged seal, Cantor identity, and now the Dear Savannah diary. All told the same thing: Evelyn Barrett hadn't vanished. She'd chosen a different life to survive. McKinney sat for a long time, rereading the diary's final passage, the ink blurred by the writer's tears. If one day someone reads this, no, Mom has no regrets. For love, Mom chose to disappear. She gently placed her hand on the page, feeling the breath of the past still there, and understood that Evelyn Barrett's disappearance ended not with a verdict, but with a story of maternal love, told through pages that had waited over 30 years to see the light. In the stark white room of the Dallas Forensics Lab, small numbered test tubes were neatly arranged on the steel table. An FBI technician gently extracted from the old sealed bag the yellowed envelope fragment, the corner still bearing a faint dried saliva stain. The handwritten Dear Savannah, Love Mom had faded almost entirely, but still recognizable as Evelyn Barrett's characteristic slant. After more than 30 years, this was the only remaining DNA sample from 1978. The one that could speak the final truth. All other evidence had only hinted at. Detective Laura McKinney stood by the observation window, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes fixed on the extraction process. Inside, the technician swabbed the envelope glue lightly with a cotton tip, added enzyme solution, then fed it into the new generation genetic analyzer. On the screen, gene sequences emerged, linking into distinctive green and red strands. Each code segment was a piece of a story time could never erase. 3 days later, when McKinney returned to the office, the official results lay waiting on her desk. She opened the envelope, reading slowly line by line. Comparison between DNA extracted from 1978 envelope A. Barrett and hair sample from Alexandra Cantor match 99.6% probability of identical individual. Simple words, cold and clinical, but carrying the weight of 3 decades of searching. McKinney leaned back in her chair, eyes closing. She needed no further confirmation. Evelyn Barrett and Alexandra Cantor were one person. That very evening, she and the forensics team expanded the data trace. The National Immigration System showed no record of Evelyn Barrett or anyone with similar documents leaving the country in 1978. Nor were there entry records in any foreign nation. Conversely, Social Security data revealed a new number, issued in New Mexico in August 1978, just 2 months after Evelyn vanished. McKinney followed the trail and discovered that number was tied to Alexandra Maria Cantor, born in Texas, but the initial residency address declared as Roswell, New Mexico, the border area adjacent to Amarillo, where Harlan had suspected a forged document ring. She printed the entire data chain, pinning it together on the bulletin board in the cold case office. The first arrow from Fort Worth to Amarillo, then extending to Roswell and ending in Salem, Oregon. A flight path across half the country, no footprints, no witnesses, only forged files and an honest DNA chain. McKinney called FBI Dallas Special Agent Raymond Tully, who led the forensics investigation team. "Are you sure about this number?" she asked. Tully replied curtly, voice firm, "Sure as a kill shot, Laura, not just DNA, but blood type, enzymes, trace isotope ratios in the hair, all match Cantor's medical records. It's the same woman, no doubt." She fell silent for a few seconds, then smiled faintly. A smile mixed with exhaustion. "Thanks, Ray. So we found the woman from the Trinity River." That night, she sat alone in the office. Outside the window, Fort Worth glowed with lights, the distant Trinity River shimmering under sodium lamps. It all began there: the Ford Fairmont, the SB bracelet, the Dear Savannah letters, and now 99.6% DNA match. Everything circled back to the start. Evelyn Barrett hadn't died. She'd disappeared with calculation. However, discovering the true identity was just the first step. The law still required action. McKinney reopened the legal file, reviewing applicable statutes. In the potential charges section, she underlined 2 lines: fraudulent identity documents, and obstruction of investigation. If it was determined that Evelyn had intentionally created forged documents to evade detection, she could face federal prosecution. But McKinney knew that after more than 30 years, prosecution wasn't just a legal matter. It was a question of ethics, the line between crime and a mother's desperation. The next morning, McKinney met the federal prosecutor's team in Dallas. In the conference room, she spread the photos, diary, DNA results, and New Mexico files across the table. A young prosecutor frowned. She rebuilt an entire identity, raised her child under a false name, and caused a decades-long investigation. Technically, that's obstructing a federal inquiry. Another pondered. But no direct victim. No one was harmed, except by her disappearance. McKinney stayed silent. She understood this decision would shape how the case was remembered, as crime or as tragedy. After the meeting, she stood in the hallway, midday light slanting through the glass. In her mind echoed Evelyn's diary line, "If anyone finds this, tell Savannah Mom never regretted it." McKinney didn't know if prosecution was what Evelyn deserved, but she knew her duty wasn't to judge, but to complete the truth. That evening, she drafted a report to the FBI Dallas field office, summarizing the investigation results and proposing next steps. But this time, unlike the usual dry reports, she handwrote a short passage enclosed with the letter, "She fled, she lied, but she also lived." And perhaps, in all that the law can't measure, a mother's love is the one thing that keeps us from fully condemning her. 3 days later, the federal prosecution approved the initial step. Preliminary warrant review, case reopened under federal jurisdiction. McKinney received the notice, staring at the words on the screen and sighing. After 34 years, Evelyn Barrett's disappearance was officially back in the investigative system, no longer a tale of old files. In the final moment of the day, she turned to the bulletin board wall, covered in documents, from Trinity River photos to the bold-printed 99.6% DNA result. Every detail now sealed tight, no room for doubt. McKinney knew the next task wouldn't be seeking truth, but bringing that truth face to face with justice. And in that silent room, under the pale yellow light, she whispered to herself, "We've found you, Evelyn. Now we see how ready you are to face the past." On September 6, 2012, after nearly half a year of review and comparison, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas officially signed arrest warrant F-12-376 for the subject, Alexandra Maria Cantor, whose true identity is Evelyn Barrett, on charges of using federal forged documents and prolonged obstruction of criminal investigation. When the warrant printed out from the fax machine, Detective Laura McKinney stood frozen, staring at the red court seal appearing in the corner of the paper, a symbol both cold and heavy with meaning. More than 34 years after the night of the disappearance by the Trinity River, Evelyn Barrett's name reappeared in the U.S. Department of Justice system. That very afternoon, McKinney flew to Salem, Oregon, coordinating with the Marion County Sheriff's Office and the FBI Portland Field Office. She didn't want a noisy arrest. No press, no live TV. No one knows until she's safely in custody, she emphasized in the brief meeting with the local commander. The agents nodded. They understood the special nature of the case. This wasn't just a criminal charge, but a story that had once shocked all of Texas in 1978. In the next 3 weeks, the surveillance team quietly tracked every daily activity of Alexandra Cantor. Every morning, she drove her silver Subaru to Bush Elementary School, where she taught 3rd grade. She greeted colleagues, led students across the street, her smile gentle and her routine so steady that no one could imagine this woman had once been the center of a federal manhunt. In the afternoons, she returned home to the small red-tiled house in suburban Salem, with climbing rose trellises around the porch and the sound of a dog barking in greeting as the car pulled in. In the evenings, she often walked around the neighborhood with her youngest son Reese, sometimes stopping at the nearby grocery store. Nothing in her actions or gaze suggested the signs of someone on the run. The agents took turns surveilling, filming, collecting identification evidence, gait, habits, voice, Even the way she wrapped her scarf in the cold Oregon wind. One whispered in a report, "If it weren't for the DNA file, no one would believe this woman was ever wanted." But McKinney wouldn't allow sentiment to interfere. She knew their mission was to execute the arrest with absolute precision. No oversights, no gunfire, no mistaken identity. On August 23rd, McKinney arrived on site for direct surveillance. She walked the neighborhood with the FBI Portland team leader, Special Agent Grant Holloway, to identify safe approach positions. They chose 4 a.m. when the streets were empty, neighbors still asleep, and also when Miss Cantor was usually still deep in sleep. A search warrant for the home was approved concurrently, allowing seizure of all personal documents, notebooks, storage devices, and items potentially related to the false identity. Throughout the preparation, McKinney was adamant about secrecy. Texas media still frequently inquired about the 1978 disappearance case, but she only replied, "No comment, all files and plans were encrypted, accessible to only 3 people. If information leaks, she'll disappear again," she reminded the entire team. "We only have one chance." On the night of September 5th, the FBI's temporary base in Salem was brightly lit. 6 agents and 3 local police officers sat around the table. The neighborhood map spread wide. McKinney stood at the head, pointing to the diagram. "This is the target," she said, her voice low but firm. "Front door faces south, 2 side windows, 1 escape route to the backyard. She lives with 2 children, but only the young son is home. No one has weapons. We move in at exactly 4 a.m. No lights, no sirens, no mistakes. The goal is safe arrest and no panic." A young officer asked, "What if she resists?" McKinney looked him straight in the eye. "She's not a violent criminal, but she's evaded us for 30 years. Don't underestimate the reaction of someone who's lived under an alias. We follow procedure, fast, clean, decisive." She glanced at her watch, 10:45 p.m. Outside, Salem's sky was foggy, fine mist falling silently on the car windows. McKinney stepped out of the room, taking a deep breath. Everything was ready. Valid arrest warrant, search warrant, support team, witness transport vehicle, body cameras already attached to tactical vests. She knew she had only one night left to complete the first part of the mission that Ray Harlan had begun in 1978. Just before dawn the next day, at 3:50 a.m. The black FBI convoy left the parking lot, gliding silently through the cold fog. As they turned into the quiet suburban neighborhood of Salem, headlights off, only the faint red glow of GPS devices blinking, McKinney sat in the command vehicle, eyes on the second hand approaching 12. In her earpiece, Special Agent Holloway's voice came softly, "Target inside the house. Bedroom light on. Team ready." She replied concisely, "Proceed at 4 o'clock. Quiet, no errors." Outside, figures in light black tactical gear stepped across the wet grass, approaching the quiet house of the woman who had carried 2 names for half her life. No one spoke another word, only steady breaths and the Salem wind whistling through the rose trellis on the porch, where in a few hours, a mother would wake up and face the past she thought she'd buried forever. Salem's sky was dimly lit, fog thick as smoke, moisture seeping into every window crack. The clock hand pointed to 5:40 a.m. on October 12, 2012, when the federal task force stopped their vehicles in front of the small house on Waverly Avenue. No sirens, no flashing blue and red lights, only the gradual fading of engines, replaced by the steady breaths of the men preparing for the moment they'd planned for over a month. From the command vehicle, Detective Laura McKinney observed the house through infrared binoculars. Inside, a dim light from the living room spilled out. Someone had risen early. On the porch, the rose trellis still held last night's rainwater. She took a long breath, signaling team leader Grant Holloway, "Proceed." 3 agents approached the front door, moving so lightly that only the sound of boots on wood was heard. One knocked 3 times, firmly. A long silence followed. Then footsteps echoed from inside the house. The door opened. The woman stood there, hair streaked with silver, wearing a cream linen robe. Light from the living room illuminated her face. Evelyn Barrett, or more precisely, the woman the world had known for the past 34 years only as Alexandra Cantor. She showed no fear, no panic. She just looked straight at the agent in front, then smiled faintly with sadness. "You're 30 years late," the words hung softly, but enough to thicken the air. McKinney stepped forward, removing her helmet, her voice low and deliberate. "Miss Barrett, by order of the federal court, you are under arrest for using forged documents and obstructing a federal investigation." Evelyn didn't reply, just nodded slightly, her eyes still strangely bright, as if finally everything had come to an end. A noise from the stairs made everyone turn. A young blonde woman in pajamas froze at the sight of the strangers in the house. That was Clara Cantor, the person Fort Worth had once known as Savannah Barrett, the baby presumed missing with her mother in 1978. "Mom, what's going on?" she exclaimed. Voice trembling, Evelyn turned, taking a step toward her daughter, but stopped by Holloway. "It's okay, honey," she said softly. "It's just that Mom owes someone an explanation." Clara looked around, eyes filled with confusion. She'd never heard her mother mention Fort Worth or the name Barrett. All her memories began in Oregon. The school days, the small house, and the gentle mother who always said they only needed each other. And now, in the cold dawn of Salem, she had to witness her mother being read her Miranda rights. The words, "You have the right to remain silent," rang out, like a knife tearing through the illusion of peace the two had built over the years. McKinney entered the house, signaling the team to collect evidence. The home was so tidy it bordered on impersonal, teaching books lined up straight. Family photos hung neatly, the kitchen table still smelling of freshly brewed coffee. In a wooden cabinet drawer in the living room, they found a small wooden box containing the Dear Savannah diary, the birth certificate in the name Clara Cantor, and a silver bracelet engraved S.B. The item that had appeared in the 1978 disappearance case photos. McKinney opened the box lid, looking down at those mementos, feeling as if she were touching the very heart of a mystery that had spanned half a lifetime. Evelyn sat silently on the sofa, hands on her knees, gaze directed out the window. As McKinney approached, she spoke, "I know you're the one who found me. I always thought if someone was patient enough, they'd do it. Maybe Ray Harlan taught you that." McKinney paused. She'd just mentioned the original investigator, who had spent years searching for her, and once said she's still alive. "He always believed that," McKinney replied. And he was right. An agent approached, placing the electronic fingerprint scanner on the table. Evelyn looked at the device, smiling wearily. "Let's make this quick, shall we?" She placed her hand on the glass. The machine beeped softly, then the screen displayed, "Match confirmed. 100% identity. Barrett. Evelyn L." The room fell into silence. No one said anything. The truth, after all those years, was now confirmed by just a fingerprint, the mark she'd tried to erase from every record for nearly half a century. Clara stood behind, eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, what are they saying? Who are you?" Evelyn turned, her gaze gentle but weary. "I'm still your mom, Clara," she said slowly. "It's just that before you were born, Mom had to become someone else to keep you." Tears fell from the girl's eyes, while McKinney stood still, knowing that what she'd just witnessed wasn't just an arrest, but an ending laden with human tragedy. Outside, the sun began to rise, fog lifting slowly from the rooftops. Two agents handcuffed Evelyn, an action required by protocol, but no one could bear to look straight at the woman. As they led her to the door, neighbors peeked through curtains, stunned by the quiet yet strange scene. Evelyn turned back for one last look at the house, where she'd lived for over 30 years under a new name, where everything had been built from intertwined love and lies. McKinney followed last, clutching the evidence box tightly. She knew it contained not just exhibits, but the story of a mother who had chosen to disappear to keep her child. As the vehicle carrying Evelyn rolled away from Waverly Avenue, morning light streamed through the windows, reflecting off the frail hands now shackled. In that moment, McKinney caught a faint smile on her lips. Not a defiant smile, but like a final farewell to the second life she'd lived. In the back seat, Clara watched silently, her face pale. She didn't cry, just whispered the question unconsciously. So all this time, who am I? No one answered. Outside, the early light shone on Salem's damp walls, and the sound of police sirens cut through the still air, ending Evelyn Barrett's 34 years in hiding, the woman who had once vanished with her child by the Trinity River's edge. The third-floor interrogation room at the Dallas Federal Building was so cold you could hear the steady tick of the clock. In front was a cup of cold coffee. Behind the one-way mirror, Detective Laura McKinney stood still, eyes fixed on the silver-haired woman sitting across the table. 34 years on the run, and finally, it all came down to this: a stark white room, 2 metal chairs, and a story only Evelyn Barrett could tell in full. McKinney entered, gently closing the door. Evelyn looked up, her eyes still bright but weary. "You're the one who found me," she said softly, voice raspy like desert wind. "Yes," McKinney replied, sitting opposite. "And I'm also the one who needs to hear it all from you." A long silence, then Evelyn took a breath, her hand trembling slightly. "I guess you want to know where I went after June 12, 1978. McKinney nodded. She leaned back, gaze distant. "That afternoon I left home with my daughter. I told the neighbor I was going to the supermarket, but really, I'd prepared everything 3 weeks earlier. I had some cash, a few changes of clothes, and one single intention to leave Fort Worth forever." Her voice was even, slow, as if reading memories line by line. "I swapped the Ford Fairmont's plates with a stolen one from a junkyard in Arlington. I drove all night to Amarillo, sleeping in the car by the highway. The next morning, I stopped at an old print shop, where a Mexican man said he could make new papers for us too if I paid in cash. He gave me an address in a Los Angeles neighborhood, saying that's where they made fake birth certificates. I believed him, because I had no one else to believe." She bowed her head, clasping her hands tightly. "I knew then the police would think I was kidnapped or murdered, but I didn't care. I only thought if I stayed, they'd take my child. I couldn't let that happen." McKinney didn't take notes, just listened. Evelyn continued. "I got to Los Angeles after 3 days. I rented a room in East Hollywood, under the alias Maria Cantor. That man, I never knew his real name, brought 2 blank birth certificates. I filled in Clara Cantor for my daughter, and Alexandra Maria Cantor for myself. He said just submit the forms in New Mexico, and I'd get a valid social security number. I did exactly that." "What happened after?" McKinney asked. Evelyn smiled sadly. "After that I cut my hair short, dyed it brown, burned all the old photos. I sold the Ford in Santa Fe, bought an old station wagon. Then I drove north, stopping in Salem, Oregon, a place where no one had ever heard of Fort Worth." Her gaze drifted. "I rented a small room near the school. I applied to teach there, using the new papers, saying I was a widow. They didn't ask much. People in Oregon are kind. They believed me. At first I was so scared I could only sleep 2 hours a night. I always thought someone would knock, or I'd hear police cars on the street. But year after year, no one found me. I started to believe I'd really disappeared." She paused, voice choking as she mentioned her daughter. Savannah, Clara, grew up healthy, smart, and happy. She knew nothing about Texas. "I didn't want her living with the feeling she was a stolen child. I only said her father died in an accident. That's the one lie I never apologized for." On the other side of the glass, an agent softly asked McKinney via radio, "Is she cooperating?" McKinney replied curtly. "More than expected." Then she turned back to Evelyn. "Do you know that forging documents and changing identity is a federal crime?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "You think I didn't know? But if you'd ever been judged unfit to mother just for refusing psychiatric meds, you'd understand I had no other choice. I didn't kill anyone. I just escaped my old life." Those words fell into the silence, cold as metal. McKinney saw in her eyes, not guilt, but exhaustion. "You never contacted anyone during that time?" Evelyn shook her head. No, I cut off everything. I only sent a diary to my old friend Margaret Hill in case someone wanted to understand why. I didn't expect it would be what helped you find me." McKinney nodded slightly, recalling the Dear Savannah notebook in Margaret's hands. Every detail Evelyn recounted matched exactly: Amarillo, Los Angeles, forged birth certificates, Salem, all perfectly aligned with the evidence they had. "So why didn't you turn yourself in once your daughter grew up?" McKinney asked. Evelyn was silent for a long time, then replied, voice almost a whisper, "Because by then I was mother to 2 children. I thought if the past stayed quiet, I'd let it sleep. But every time I saw Clara smile, I remembered who I used to be. I knew one day the truth would come knocking." She paused, looking up at McKinney. "And now it has." The young investigator looked at the woman across from her, not a classic criminal, but someone who had lived half her life in her own shadow. "Do you regret it?" McKinney asked. Evelyn thought for a very long time. "No," she said, eyes gleaming in the dim room light. "If I had to choose again, I'd do the same. I don't regret running. I only regret the pain I caused others." When the interrogation ended, McKinney stepped out of the room, feeling both accomplished in her duty and the loss of something hard to name. In the long hallway, the light reflecting off the glass showed her image and Evelyn's 2 women of different generations, different choices, but sharing one thing: no one escapes the past. The interrogation room door closed, echoing only Evelyn Barrett's raspy voice. "I didn't kill anyone, Miss McKinney. I just fled the life I was no longer allowed to live." Outside the window, the Texas sun rose high, illuminating the faded label on the old file. Evelyn L. Barrett, voluntary disappearance with fraudulent identity. But to McKinney, this case had never been just a charge. It was a story about the limits of the law and the power of a mother bold enough to disappear to save her own soul. In December 2012, Fort Worth's sky was dry and cold, thick with gray fog. In front of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas, the police convoy stopped, and the woman who had carried 2 names stepped down. No longer Alexandra Cantor, the file now read only Evelyn L. Barrett. After 34 years, she returned to the place she'd left, not as a victim, but as a defendant. The courtroom was brightly lit. Detective Laura McKinney sat in the back row, in front of her 2 sealed file boxes: AFIS, DNA, diary, SB bracelet. At the prosecution table, Robert Keating stood first. He spoke in a flat voice, like reading a report. "Your Honor, this is not a kidnapping case. This is a decades-long identity fraud. Evelyn Barrett deliberately created the alias Alexandra Cantor, forged birth certificates and social security numbers, concealed her identity, and obstructed investigations across multiple states. The consequences: millions of dollars and thousands of federal man-hours wasted." He projected images on the screen: the abandoned Ford Fairmont by the Trinity River, then the 100% fingerprint match photo, finally, the 99.6% DNA chart. This is not a touching story, it's deliberate conduct. Miss Barrett sat silently, hands clasped together. When Keating finished, defense attorney Sarah Donovan stood. Her voice was soft but steady. "Yes, she ran, but remember, 1978 was not 2012. When a woman is stripped of custody just for being deemed unstable, leaving is no longer a choice, but a survival instinct." She held up the Dear Savannah notebook, opening to the first page. "If one day someone reads this, no, Mom never regretted it." Donovan spoke slowly. "These are not the words of a criminal. These are the words of a mother pushed to the edge." McKinney was called to the stand. She presented how AFIS identified, how the 1978 envelope DNA matched the Salem hair sample, and how details from Margaret Hill's diary aligned with investigative facts. Every piece of evidence closed like a circle. "No doubt," she said. "Evelyn Barrett is Alexandra Cantor." She sat down, avoiding looking directly at Miss Barrett. It was Evelyn's turn to stand. She spoke calmly, almost wearily. "I know I broke the law, but I didn't kill anyone. I didn't steal from anyone. I was just afraid of losing my daughter. I drove away, cut my hair, changed my name, taught school, raised my child, and waited for this day. If someone calls me a criminal, I accept it. But please understand, I only fled the life where I was no longer allowed to be a mother." Her words silenced the courtroom. The prosecutor cross-examined briefly. "Did you know your actions meant your ex-husband lost his child forever?" Evelyn bowed her head, tears streaming. "I knew, and I've paid for it every day." Keating fell silent, saying no more. That afternoon, Judge Addison pronounced sentence. His voice was deep and slow, but not harsh. After considering the conduct and circumstances, the court finds the defendant guilty on 2 counts. Use of forged documents and obstruction of federal investigation. The court notes the defendant has no history of violence, no material gain, and full cooperation after arrest. Therefore, the sentence is 18 months imprisonment, including time served, followed by 2 years supervised release. The gavel fell with a dry crack, ending the case that had haunted the city for over 3 decades. No one said anything. Evelyn stood up, eyes toward McKinney. She nodded slightly, whispering as she passed by. "Thank you for finding me. At least now I don't have to hide." McKinney didn't respond, just watched her go. In that moment, she realized justice sometimes has no winners, just those who've endured enough to close the past. Outside, the Fort Worth wind was crisp. Clara Cantor, the blonde girl once presumed missing in 1978, stood motionless by the roadside, face pale as a ghost. As her mother passed, their eyes met. No words were spoken, but in that brief second, both understood the truth had arrived, and it would stay forever. Reporters crowded the courthouse gate, but no one from the investigative team answered. Keating said only one sentence to the cameras: "The Barrett case is closed. No one escapes their own shadow." As for McKinney, leaving the courthouse, she walked slowly through Trinity Square. She stopped, looking up at the cold gray sky, where faint sunlight slipped down the old buildings. In her hand was the leather Dear Savannah notebook, the final page still bearing the shaky handwriting. "Mom and you will be okay." She didn't know what would become of Miss Barrett after her sentence, nor if Clara would ever forgive. But she understood that every case, no matter how long, leads to one point: the truth must take shape, must have a name, and must be heard in the voice of those involved. As she left the courthouse area, McKinney looked south, toward the Trinity River winding through the city. On the wind, a distant train whistle echoed, recalling that afternoon when Evelyn Barrett drove away, starting the 34-year pursuit. Now everything was closed. The mother had returned, justice had spoken its part, and Fort Worth could finally stop waiting. In the Fort Worth Police Department's Cold Case Unit office, the clock neared midnight as Detective Laura McKinney still sat before the dim computer screen. The room was so quiet, you could hear the wind whistling through the old window frame. On the desk was a thick file stack, spine clearly marked hash 78 FW 231, Evelyn and Savannah Barrett. 34 years, tens of thousands of pages of reports, and countless names that had passed through this file. Now, it was just her completing the final lines. She pulled the papers closer, typing slowly, carefully, as if one wrong detail could skew the entire history. Final summary. Barrett case. In the opening section, McKinney listed the 8 key verified pieces of evidence, the airtight chain of data leaving no gaps in the case. 1 DNA extracted from the 1978 envelope matched 99.6% with the hair sample collected in Salem, Oregon. 2 AFI's fingerprints matched exactly with the 1994 DMV records. 3. The Dear Savannah diary accurately described the route Fort Worth, Amarillo, Oregon, confirming the escape journey. 4 Polaroid photos preserved by Margaret Hill matched the woman known as Alexandra Cantor. 5 blood type O+ matched between Fort Worth medical records from 1976, and Salem hospital records from 1998. 6. Witness Margaret Hill confirmed receiving the memento box from Evelyn Barrett in 1979. 7. The Clara Cantor birth certificate bore a forged Amarillo seal, matching data for the missing daughter Savannah Barrett. 8. The silver SB bracelet evidence collected in Salem matched the 1978 crime scene photos. She paused for a moment, looking at the lines she'd just written. 8 pieces of evidence scattered across 3 decades, 8 fragments reconnecting the journey from mystery to truth. At the bottom of the page, McKinney typed the closing line, "No homicide, case resolved. No murder, no killer, just a mother fleeing her old life to keep her only child." On the desk, the light reflected off the old black and white photo, Evelyn Barrett, 29, holding Savannah on the front porch. She stared at it for a long time. Miss Barrett's words from the trial still echoed in her head. "I didn't kill anyone. I just escaped my old life." Now that had become the official closing conclusion of the file. The next morning, McKinney called Ray Harlan, the retired investigator living in San Angelo. He was the first to open the Barrett file in 1978. And the one who'd told her some cases don't close, they just wait for someone else to continue. When he answered, his voice was still raspy as ever. "That you, Laura?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "I thought you'd want to hear this. We found her. Evelyn Barrett is alive, in Oregon." There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then his voice softened. Raspy but clear. "I knew it. I always thought she didn't die, just went somewhere to live out the rest of her life." McKinney heard him exhale lightly, then add, "You did good, Laura. 34 years of waiting, and finally we have the answer." That afternoon, as she printed the final report, the first sheet slid from the printer, bold letters printed clearly in the top corner. Fort Worth Police Department. Cold Case Unit Final Report. Case #78 FW 231 Status. Resolved, no homicide, verified identity. McKinney clipped the report into a hard cover, sealed it with a red stamp, then personally placed it on the closed case's storage shelf. The light clink of metal echoed, dry but final. A sound investigators regarded as the period at the end of years of unrest. She stood looking at the file box in storage, the lettering faded under dust. Barrett, Evelyn L., missing 1978. Now below it, a new label had been added. Resolved, 2012. She gently closed the cabinet door, feeling as if she were closing a door on time itself. Before leaving the office, McKinney wrote a small note and stuck it on her personal board. Barrett case closed, 34 years. No one missing anymore. Then she turned off the light, watching the sunset flood in from the window. Fort Worth was still bustling out there. But inside her was a rare stillness, the kind that comes only when a case finally finds its voice. That night, she drove along the Trinity River. The water gleamed black and silver under the moonlight, silent as if it had witnessed nothing. A few miles from the bank was where they'd once found Evelyn's Ford Fairmont, with a door open in the summer of 1978, the start of it all. 34 years later, the spot had no markers, no memorials, just wind and the scent of damp grass. McKinney pulled over, stepped out, and watched the slow-flowing water. She pulled from her pocket a small copy of the Barrett mother and daughter photo, the only duplicate she'd requested after archiving. She placed it on the hood of her shoe, letting the wind take it. The photo swirled lightly before falling to the river's surface, drifting with the moonlight. "She was found," she whispered, as if sending it to Harlan, to Fort Worth, and to the woman who'd once vanished from this city. In the department's records, case #78 FW 231 was officially transferred to closed, no further investigation status. And on the final note line, below McKinney's red ink stamp, there was just one short sentence: "Case resolved, truth recovered after 34 years." In the early days of 2013, As news of the Evelyn Barrett case's official closure spread, Texas seemed to awaken from a 3-decade slumber. From Fort Worth to Dallas, every major newspaper ran the same bold headline: 1978, missing mother found, lived under alias for 34 years. A black and white photo of young Evelyn appeared beside a color one of her in Oregon, two faces eerily similar, as if time were just a hazy pain over a truth that had always been there. In a few days, the story blanketed TV stations. Texas morning talk shows discussed nothing else but the mother who fled with her daughter. Some viewers saw her as a deceiver who'd wasted police resources and left her husband in lifelong despair waiting for news. But many others called her a victim of the era of the 1970s, when women's voices were labeled mental instability, when a custody ruling could crush a family. Popular talk shows like Lone Star Stories and True Justice Weekly recreated the case with simulations, expert interviews, and first-hand accounts. Reporters hunted every detail, from the abandoned Ford Fairmont by the Trinity River to the Dear Savannah diary. A national TV channel replayed the entire cold case unit investigation journey, narrated in a deep, warm voice. 34 years, 8 pieces of evidence, 1 woman, and a truth seemingly buried forever. Detective Laura McKinney became the most mentioned name in investigative circles. Her inbox overflowed with handwritten letters and emails, strangers sending thanks, old missing persons victims offering encouragement, and middle-aged women sharing how they saw parts of their own lives in Evelyn Barrett's story. One letter read, "Thank you for proving that some cases deserve closure, even without a perpetrator." McKinney read each line, feeling warmth, but also weight. She knew behind every thank you lay long-held wounds that justice didn't always mend in time. Online forums erupted in fierce debates. One side called Evelyn selfish, evading responsibility, lying to the world. The other saw her as a symbol of a mother's rebellion against outdated legal biases. A Fort Worth Star-Telegram op-ed wrote, "Miss Barrett committed a crime, but she was also a victim of a system that didn't yet know how to listen to women." The piece was shared tens of thousands of times, turning the Barrett case into a topic not just of crime, but of the times. McKinney declined most interviews. She told colleagues, "I don't want this case to become an emotional story. It was an investigation, and the most important thing is that the truth was finally found." But even avoiding the cameras, images of the young persistent female detective pursuing the case aired on TV under the title, "The Woman Who Found Evelyn." In Salem, Oregon, the Barrett family's small house became a spot where passers-by stopped to leave flowers and notes, wishing you peace. Neighbors said her daughter, Clara, no longer lived there. She'd moved out right after the sentencing, leaving a small sign by the door, "Please don't judge." My mom did what she believed was right. For the Fort Worth community, the case's closure wasn't just the end of a mystery, but a reflection on the system's own historical flaws. A small ceremony was held at the Fort Worth Police Department to honor the cold case unit. McKinney stood among colleagues, receiving a commendation plaque with the inscription, "For perseverance and integrity in pursuit of truth." As the ceremony ended, she quietly left the hall, dodging the waiting reporters' lenses. That afternoon, she drove along the Trinity River, where it all began. The water gleamed copper-red under the sunset, a light breeze carrying scents of grass and dust across the surface. She pulled over by the bank, where Evelyn's car had been found in 1978. Now just an empty lot with old willow trees. McKinney stepped out and stood silent for a long time, holding the final note from the file, Case #78, FW 231, resolved. Far off, the sun sank, leaving long streaks like ink blots on the water. She looked down at the river and heard in her mind the familiar TV reporter's voice from last night's broadcast, closing the Barrett story segment, Fort Worth 34 years, 1 mother, 1 child, and a city that never stopped searching. Justice may come late, but the truth never disappears. McKinney nodded faintly, turning away. The last light of day reflected off an iron plaque by the bank, where words had been added just a week before. Trinity River, the place where the search for truth began and ended. She walked back to her car, leaving the quiet river behind, and in the Texas afternoon wind, the Barrett case truly ended, not with a gavel strike, but with the silence of justice finally finding its form. The Fort Worth 1978 story reminds us that between law and humanity, there's always a gray area requiring vigilance. Evelyn Barrett left her home by the Trinity River, changed her name to Alexandra Cantor in Salem to keep her daughter Savannah Clara, then paid 18 months in prison for the false identity and obstruction of investigation. Conversely, Detective Laura McKinney and the cold case unit's persistence, AFIS fingerprints, DNA on the Dear Savannah envelope, silver SB bracelet, Polaroid photos, proves technology can unlock old files when evidence is preserved properly and procedures are rigorous. Lesson: if stuck in custody disputes or emotional abuse, seek legal aid. Family lawyers, mediation, going rogue, turns civil conflict into federal crime and causes long-term trauma for children. For law enforcement, digitize files, connect federally, investigate victim-centered. An envelope or diary can be the key, like file hash 78 FW 231. For communities and media, avoid trial by airwaves, focus on empathy, respect facts, and support social services. In families, document, log exchanges, seek proper mental health care, and find mediators before escalation. Justice may come late, but truth doesn't vanish when we persevere, act fairly, and put children's interests first. If you believe truth, no matter how long buried, will always be found, hit subscribe to follow us for more cold cases across America. Thank you for joining us on Fort Worth 1978. See you in the next video, where justice awakens once more.